This Sunday, the Church proposes the story of Lazarus, the rising of Lazarus from the dead. And the first thought that came to me was the big question. This is about to be or not to be. The big question of life. On the other hand, there's a second further question which is very much linked to the first one. To do or not to do? That is another question, big one. We're living a time when these questions pop up every minute in our faces. To be or not to be, to do or not to do. Sickness is a harbinger of death. We cannot be more aware of it than these days when the enemy, the virus, seems to be everywhere and inside everyone. We're anxious and terrified. Some people fight back, others simply deny and run in front of these big questions. And Jesus wants to face these questions, which are our day-to-day questions, not just during a crisis. These questions that came up with the sickness of Lazarus and eventually his death. And Jesus decides to face death, but on his divine terms, as God, and therefore death not as an enemy to be destroyed or eliminated, but as a friend to be embraced and transformed into real life. That is why this story is put from beginning to end in a context of friendship and love. That's life. Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, were his close friends. Lazarus was the very dear friend of Jesus. Look how much he loved him. This is the real starting point and basis to be able to somehow come to some answer about what it means to be or not to be, to do or not to do. On receiving news of his sickness, Jesus sounds like he is in denial. This sickness, Jesus says, like every sickness, is never fatal. Deliberately, he waits for 4 days until his friend dies. He wants to face the ultimate challenge, not just healing a sick person, but test the truth, the good news he came to announce in his own body. To be or not to be, the question must be answered, whatever the cost. So he decides to go back where he himself had just recently almost been stoned to death. He faced death himself in the same place that Lazarus died. Whose death did he want to face squarely this time? Was it the death of Lazarus or his own death? Actually, there is only one death, and it belongs to us all. We are all in this together. In their naive but genuine love for Jesus, the disciples say, "Let's go and die with him." It's their death, as well as that of Jesus and of Lazarus and of us all. But where there is love, it casts away all fear, even in the fearful and timid disciples. Let's go and die with him. The sisters were devastated, both by the loss of their brother, but also, and understandably, by the laid-back attitude of Jesus, who deliberately chose to arrive 4 days too late. Even now, Martha takes the initiative, whilst Mary, the one who was sitting, listening to Jesus in the previous instance, Mary, the symbol of the contemplative, she just remains at home, nursing her bereavement. Martha, who goes out to meet Jesus, the proactive doer, to do, she loves doing things, blames Jesus for doing nothing. Just that, doing nothing. Right? The opposite of the way Mary looked at life. She had to do things. Had you come on time, you could have healed him. To do or not to do? That's the second big question. And Jesus tries to put her in the bigger picture. And he starts by saying, oh, why all this fuss? He will rise again. And Martha answers in a tone which surely betrays her polite anger. Yes, we know. We know it. Someday, God knows when, where, or how we shall live again. But I want my brother alive now. And I imagine Jesus struggling with the same question and trying to help himself and Martha to deal with it. I am the life, he answers. Faith in me removes all boundaries between life and death. These are not two realities, but one. And that one reality is me. That me that Jesus speaks of includes us, you and me. Because he came to be one with us and make us one with him. Our story is therefore his story. Our death, his death. Because his life is our life. If only we really believed in him, how easier would it be for us to believe in ourselves? At this point, Mary enters the scene and they tell her, the Master is here. He is calling you. The initiative is in the hands of Jesus. And that was enough to get her out of her grieving self-isolation. She ran out to him and blurted out the same question as her sisters. Why did you come so late? And she broke down in tears. And so did Jesus. Like and with Mary, the Gospel says, Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Did Jesus waver in his faith, just like Martha and Mary did? Why did he lose his composure? He was so self-assured in waiting 4 days for the time to come. Why was he seemingly at least shaken by doubt and lose all the serenity with which he had acted up to now? The answer is beautifully simple. It is our pains that he bore, our despair that he came to share, our unbelief that he came to experience. One with us means one with us, one of us. And somehow he takes the initiative back into his hands. Where have you laid him? He asked. He seems to be asking us, where have you buried your love, your hopes, your joys, your pains that you have shared in loving those who are so close to you, your dear ones? Do you believe that all this love is now wasting in the nothingness of the tomb? Is the tomb the last word, destroying the life that has made you and your loved ones who you are? And with one voice, together with the disciples, we reply to him, "Come, Lord, and see where we have put him, where we have put all that is dear to us. Join in our search for real and lasting meaning in all we do and live, in our day to day struggle, in this adventure that we call life. Stay with us, Lord, with us in our pains, our doubts, our hopes, our fragile faith, our dreams, our loves. You are our only hope, and you have come to see what we see, to live what we live, to be who we all want to be. Are we so desperate that we can do nothing to stop or avoid the inevitability of our death? Can we do something to do or not to do? Amazingly, Jesus starts from what we can do. We start by expecting Him to do things for us. And faced by the daunting task of opening the tomb, of lovingly overcoming death that is inside, Jesus turns to them first and asks them to roll up their sleeves and do something about it, however futile it may seem. Remove the stone. Remove your hardness of heart. Remove your blindness. Remove your despairing resignation. Reminds me of Mother Teresa, faced by that ocean of sickness and death in Calcutta, who used to say, "What you can do, I cannot do. But what I can do, you cannot do. Together, let us do something beautiful for God." And Jesus wanted to do this marvelous miracle together with Mary and Martha and the friends of Lazarus. That's us. Jesus does nothing by himself, always with us and through us. And Jesus first asks us to do, therefore, what we can do. Only then does he do what only he can do. And after they removed the stone, then he turns to Lazarus and commands him, "Lazarus, come out of the tomb." And even Lazarus had to do his part. He came out of the tomb on his own two bound feet. That's again you and me. Let's pull ourselves out of the depths of our loss of hope, our abdications, our dead aspirations and dreams. Like Lazarus, in spite of all that seems dead within us, our very real and painful limitations, shackling us, our disabilities, binding us. Let us just take that little wobbly, unsure step forward from darkness of the tomb of our helplessness. And once we shift our eyes from our own despair and hopelessness, we'll discover that we're surrounded by so many of our wounded and weak brothers and sisters who come to our assistance to help us break free from our bandages, remove his bandages. Our friends are part of the adventure, of our liberation process, of our rising from the dead. Because this is real life. Life is simply being one with God. And to be is to be with God and to be with our brothers and sisters. That's being. To be or not to be. When we're on our own, when we think we can do it by ourselves, when we are centered on ourselves, we can't do it. Life is freedom, but not the freedom for each one of us to go his or her own way, but that other freedom which liberates us from ourselves so that we can inch forward in our journey towards our togetherness in Jesus. Only He can gather us all into a liberating oneness, a life that has no limits, has no bounds. That's why He is the only way, the truth, the life. And this story is about life. But on a lighter tone, I can't help sharing this with you. Whenever I read the story of Lazarus, my mind immediately thinks of what might have happened after all the fuss was over, the people went back home, and Jesus finally found himself alone for a heart-to-heart chat with Lazarus over a cup of tea, perhaps, I don't know. And perhaps mischievously, I imagine Lazarus speaking to Jesus and telling him, "Well, Lord, I don't know how to thank you for bringing me back here. But honestly, I can't help asking, why did you have to do it? After 4 days, dead, after having gone through all that pain, that suffering, to cross over to the other life, I was starting to feel relieved for having got this business over, this business of dying. The sickness was so painful, the dying was such a terrifying, horrible experience. I was so glad and relieved that it was finally all over. But I had barely started resting when you called me back to pick up my life where I had left it. Well, that's fine, except that now I'm not very excited at the thought that I have to do it all over again a second time. And looking at the fearful and terrified eyes of Lazarus, Jesus smiled. He patted him on the shoulder and just replied, "Don't worry. When the time comes for your second death, I will have gone through it before you by then. So, on that second time, don't you worry. You'll find me there waiting for you." Let's forget our imagination and go back to the Gospel. The story of Jesus and Lazarus ends with these words: "And there were many who believed in him." Let us do likewise, so that when faced by our own mortality or the death of our dear ones, we also turn to Jesus and tell him, "To whom shall we go, Master? You have the words of eternal life." God bless you.